Hi. So this week we're gonna discuss the effects of quantitative restrictions on trade. Tariffs, quotas, and subsidies under Ricardian simplifications. So basically we analyze the consequences of barriers to trade under the assumption of constant returns to scale, perfect competition, as well as perfect international mobility. Zero transaction costs effectively. Okay, so we start with the reference point, which is free trade, a situation when there are no restrictions, quantitative restrictions on the international flow of goods. So we assume that market is perfectly competitive. In this case, you can see that foreign consumers have a comparative advantage because world price is lower than equilibrium price on the domestic market, which means that foreign producers can produce the good at the lower per unit cost, which is mirrored by the fact that they can offer lower price. Also, we assume that foreign supply is perfectly elastic, which means that foreign producers can supply any quantity of the good as long as price is equal to PW, or the world price. So what is the logic here? If we assume that markets are perfectly competitive and there are zero transaction costs, then domestic producers have no opportunity to offer price above the world price. Because again, that's how competitive market works. We assume that good is perfectly homogeneous. And if domestic consumers have free access to international market, there is no transaction cost. It means that if domestic producers will offer a higher price, price above PW, they will get zero revenue. So domestic consumers will purchase only from foreign producers. So this is the quantity domestic producers are able and willing to supply under the world price. And as we have discussed a second ago, they are forced to accept the world price. So this is corresponding quantity. This is the quantity which domestic consumers are willing and able to buy at the world price. So this will be the quantity supplied by domestic producers, quantity demanded by domestic consumers, and the difference between them is import. So basically foreign consumers just, cover this difference. Okay, so this light blue rectangle will stand for the revenue of domestic producers. So basically price times quantity sold by domestic producers. This fraction, this triangle, will stand for producer surplus or profit of domestic producers. So the difference between quantity demanded and quantity supplied on domestic market under the world price is imports. And this dark blue rectangle stands for the revenue of foreign producers, or basically the value of imports for the domestic economy. So this is number of units sold by foreign producers times price at which they sell. Okay, so when it comes to consumers, normally this would be consumer surplus on the domestic market. However, due to the fact that foreign producers offer lower price and they are able to fully satisfy domestic demand, here we've got consumer surplus. So this entire yellow triangle. So basically, this is the difference between reservation price and price at which consumers purchase goods for each consumer on the market. And if you sum this up, till the last unit sold on the market, you will get aggregate consumer surplus. Okay, so although it's not that visible as it was, when we discussed international trade based on comparative advantage using production possibilities frontiers, you definitely can see that consumer surplus benefit from international trade, because in comparison to closed economy in autarky, they enjoy bigger consumer surplus. And the interesting thing is that in this case, it's really visible that free trade is not that good for less efficient domestic consumers, because normally in the closed economy, this would be producer surplus for domestic producers. I mean, the distance between equilibrium price and marginal cost, till the last unit sold by domestic producers, and now it's definitely smaller. So this is something which is not visible under the Ricardian model, because under Ricardian model we do not distinguish between producers and consumers. We just analyze overall consumption, overall aggregate consumption in the economy, which does not allow us to distinguish between the effects on international trade on consumers and producers. However, it's more than visible on this graph. Nevertheless, when it comes to overall allocative efficiency, free trade is still efficient, because in comparison to the closed domestic economy, where total surplus is represented by this triangle, here we've got this shape. So even though producer surplus is smaller under free trade, still increasing the consumer surplus is big enough to compensate for this and imply the overall increase in total surplus in domestic economy. So when it comes to restrictions, first we've got tariffs, and basically tariffs can be described as taxes on import. So this is some additional payment which foreign consumers have to contribute to the government in the domestic economy per each unit of good they sell in domestic economy. So again, we assume perfectly elastic foreign supply. We assume perfect competition on domestic and on foreign market. So basically in this case, tariff automatically implies increase in the effective price of foreign goods. So now instead of PW, we've got PW plus T. So the world price would increase by the value of tariff, and this will be the new effective price. So at this price, domestic consumers would like to purchase less, in comparison to situation with the free trade, because for them the effective price has increased. So now we have new quantity demanded on domestic market under tariff, and for this price, foreign consumers are forced to introduce this price because they have to pay tariffs to domestic government. But when it comes to domestic producers, now they are just, able to increase their price just due to the fact foreign producers increase their price as well by the amount of tariff. So for this price, this is the quantity that domestic producers are able and willing to supply on the domestic market, which is again bigger in comparison to, this quantity on this graph. So as the result, the difference between quantity demanded and quantity supplied on domestic market under PW plus T is still covered by foreign producers, so it stands for import. So again, now domestic producers have bigger revenue. So this blue rectangle stands for the revenue of domestic producers. So quantity supplied by domestic producers times world price under tariff, PW plus T. The revenue of foreign producers obviously decreases because now they supply less. And tariff times import stands for government revenue. So this green rectangle is collected by government in the domestic economy. And obviously consumers in the domestic economy are worse off, because take a look, this used to be their consumer surplus. this entire triangle, and now they purchase less goods at the higher price, which implies that their consumer surplus is smaller. And when it comes to, some normative implications of tariffs, you can see that consumer surplus has actually decreased, and overall social surplus decreased as well. Because take a look, like this used to be the entire social surplus, so part of consumer surplus was taken by producers. So instead of this triangle, we've got a bigger one. Part of this was taken by government in the form of government revenue, and those two white triangles stand for the fractions of consumer surplus which were not acquired by any party. So effectively, this is just a welfare loss. So yeah, again, as the result of tariffs, producers are better off, consumers are worse off, government is better off, and overall society is worse off because of decrease in the total social surplus. So when it comes to quota, how you analyze it? So basically, quota is some quantitative restrictions on imports. So under quota, the volume of imports should be equal to quota. And in order to analyze the effects of quota, instead of a single domestic supply and infinitely elastic foreign supply, we assume joint domestic and foreign supply, or basically international supply, or ST, total supply. So it stands for domestic supply plus quota, where the horizontal distance between the domestic supply curve and international aggregate total supply curve is equal to quota. So how it looks like? Under quota, there is new price under quota, which is determined by the intercept of domestic demand curve and total international supply curve. Again, domestic supply plus quota. So under this price under quota, again, quantity supplied by domestic producers increases, in comparison to this quantity, we've got this one. So the revenue of domestic producers increases, and surplus of domestic producers increases accordingly. Consumers are worse off because price under quota is bigger than the world price, so they purchase smaller quantity, again, in comparison to this one, at the higher price, which decreases overall consumer surplus. The volume of imports decreases at the same time. So basically, the volume of imports is smaller. It will be equal to quota. At the same time, foreign producers enjoy some addition to the revenue in the form of quota revenue. So quota revenue is equal to the difference between quota price and world price multiplied by the amounts of imports, and it's defined as some addition, to foreign producers' revenue as the result of quota. So government is indifferent, so there is neither addition, neither decrease in government revenue. And this entire shape, it's here, it would be just too hard to show it on the same graph, stands for the welfare losses. Simply because this is the fraction of consumer surplus which was cut by quota. So, here we have the original triangle, and now it's smaller. So this part was taken away as the result of quota. This fraction was taken by domestic producers, and it served as the addition to producer surplus. And again, this part was not acquired by any party. That's why it stands for the welfare losses resulting from quota. So again, analogously to tariffs, quotas are bad for allocative efficiency. because they result in the decrease of total social surplus, in comparison to a reference point or free trade. So finally, we analyze subsidies. And subsidy is basically providing some financial assistance from government to domestic producers per the unit of product sold. Okay, it's not visible in this graph, but basically subsidy is just the vertical distance between original domestic supply and new supply under subsidy. So we still assume that foreign producers have infinitely elastic supply, so they are able to supply any quantity of product as long as the price is equal to the world price. However, the key idea here is that under subsidy, domestic producers are able to increase their quantity supplied under the world price. So this used to be quantity supplied under free trade, and this is new quantity supplied under subsidy. So as a result, the volume of imports decreases, the revenue of foreign producers decreases accordingly, and consumers are not affected by the subsidy. Still, there will be some welfare loss. Again, it will be visible on the next graph because, there are too many things happening simultaneously on the same graph. I will show it to you in a second. Okay, so yeah, here we have more details. So as I said before, under subsidy, we have a bigger quantity supplied by domestic producers. As usual, quantity demanded. The difference between quantity demanded and quantity supplied on domestic market under the world price is equal to imports. However, again, if you take a look, this volume is bigger than it used to be without subsidy under old quantity supplied. So when it comes to implications of this, here is government spending, which is equal to subsidy, the vertical distance between domestic supply and domestic supply under subsidy, times quantity supplied by domestic producers. So this is overall government spending. So this fraction of the spending will go to domestic producers, increasing their producer surplus from this triangle to this triangle. And this orange triangle is not acquired by any party, so basically it just stands for welfare losses. So yeah, again, when we talk about allocative efficiency implications of international trade restrictions, then here again barriers to trade rather undermine this, because as the result there is decrease in overall total social surplus. This time, at the cost of government, but nevertheless. Okay, so the final note is, please keep in mind that here any piece of analysis is relevant only to the small economy. So the idea is that neither of the policies introduced in the small economy will affect any other economy except of the domestic economy, So, for instance, this kind of analysis will definitely not apply to United States or European Union, big economies with significant portion in the total world GDP and total world international trade. Okay, so that's it, and thank you for your attention.